again, Wired Fam. Hope everybody's doing well. As you can see, we're in the shop again today. We're going to talk about rods. We're going to talk about how to choose the best crappie rod for the technique that you like to fish with. So stick with us. We're going to talk about these ACC crappie sticks. We're going to talk about several different sizes, why I like each size, which one would work best for you. Stick with us. We'll be right back. All right, YouTube, welcome back. Well, like I said before, we're going to talk about these ACC crappie sticks, and we're going to talk about each different size and what technique I feel each size works best for. So if you're looking for a crappie rod, okay, and you're not sure what size you need, this is going to be the video for you. Because I'm going to talk through each one of these different rods. I'm going to tell you exactly how I utilize each one of these different rods. And hopefully it'll help you pick out which rod you need when you hit ACC Crappie Sticks website to pick up a rod for the way and the technique that you like to catch these fish. Okay, so let's start out probably one of my personal favorites. Everybody knows I like to shoot docks. I like to fish brush. I'm a short pole fisherman. I always have been. Let's start out with one of my personal favorites. This is the 6-footer. Okay, this is the 6-foot ACC crappie stick. And all of my rods actually have a Fluger Try-On size 25 reel. So if you guys want to know, that's what I run on my rods. Maybe on some of my trolling rods I don't, but we'll get into that here a little later. But Fluger Try-On size 25 for those that are going to want to know what reel are on these. But 6-foot ACC crappie stick. What do I like to do with that 6-footer? That 6-footer is absolutely perfect. It's a 2-piece rod, but it is absolutely perfect for dock shooting. Okay, this is my go-to dock shooting rod. It's the 6-foot ACC crappie stick. It's got a medium fast action. Okay, it's got a very fast tip, great backbone. You can really put a lot of bow in that jig, which I'll show you here. You can take that jig and you can really put a lot of bow into that rod, and you can shoot that jig really well. So when you shoot that jig, it comes off this rod extremely fast because that fast tip, okay? Comes off there very, very fast. Shoots that jig right up underneath that dock. Great, great dock shooting rod. So the 6-foot ACC crappie stick is my go-to for shooting docks, okay? Now, the 6.5-footer. This is the 6.5-foot ACC crappie stick, guys. It is also a medium fast action, okay? As you can see, this has braid on it. These are my brush rods. This is what I'm using when I'm casting brush. When I'm pitching out to brush and I'm casting the brush piles on the lake, this 6.5-footer is my go-to rod, okay? Why not the 6, Matt? Why not the 6-footer? Well, because I like a little bit longer rod when I'm fishing brush. That way when I set that hook on that fish, I've got a little bit more rod tip. I've got a little bit more of a swing for my hook set. But I'm still a short enough rod that I can make those little roll pitches, those little roll casts. I can make those casts to the brush pile, and I can keep my rod short to where it's not cumbersome in the boat. So I like the 6.5-footer for fishing brush, okay, and for open water fish. If I'm going to cast to open water fish, I like a 6.5-foot rod. A lot of times, especially tournament scenarios, when I'm fishing with somebody else in the boat, there's 2 people on the deck, you know, you get much longer than a 6.5-footer, you're starting to, you know, hit somebody in the head or start to get a little cumbersome with the length. I like a 6.5-footer for casting to open water fish and fishing brush piles, casting and pitching, okay? So that's what I use that 6.5-footer for. Very, very good rod. Again, great backbone, medium fast tip on that 6.5-foot ACC crappie stick, okay? I like the fork handle. Now, let's talk about, this is an 8-foot ACC crappie stick, okay? And as you can see I got a slip float set up on this one. I like the 7.5 foot and the 8 foot. Okay, they offer a 7.5 and an 8. I like the 7.5 and the 8 for slip floating. Okay, if I'm gonna slip float minnows, or if I'm going to be throwing a float fly. So if I'm throwing a float fly rig, I like an 8 foot ACC crappie stick. It's not too long. Okay, I can move it around. I can make my casts, but I can also fish up to about 8-10 foot deep. I can fish 10, even 12 foot deep with a float and fly on an 8 foot rod and still be able to cast that float and fly. Okay, a slip float, again, you've got a little bit of leeway with a slip float because obviously you're not trying to cast 8 or 10 foot between the float and the fly. But I like that 8 foot rod because when you're slip float fishing, you generally have slack line on the water. You're watching your float. When that float goes down, when you set that hook, I've got all that swing from that 8 foot rod, okay, coming back to pick that line up and set that hook on that fish. So I can get a really good hook set with a longer rod when I'm slip floating. So 7.5, 8 footer, slip floating, float and fly. Anytime I'm trying to float fish, I like to go with that 7.5 to 8 footer. Also, before I put that rod down, the 8 footer starts my trolling setup. Okay, I typically troll when I'm by myself. I typically troll 6 rods. If I'm with someone and I've got another person in the boat, I will troll 8. So I'll take my 6.5s will be my 7th and 8th rods. But for me, I generally troll 6 rods. So my 8 footer starts my trolling setup. Okay, I run 8s, 10s, and 12s. So I have an 8, a 10, and a 12 off either side of my boat. So that 8 footer starts my trolling setup as well. Okay. All right, the 10 footer. Now we're starting to get into those longer rods that a lot of you guys have seen on a lot of YouTube channels. There's a lot of people out there that are using these longer rods to snipe fish, if you will. They're getting out in front of them with that Livescope. They're putting that rod out there and they're setting that hook on those fish 10, 12 foot in front of the boat. That 10 footer kind of starts where that transition happens, okay? So for me, a 10 footer, I use the vertical jig in deep brush. If I'm vertical jigging in deep brush, I'll use a 10 footer, and I'm talking 20 plus feet, okay? East Tennessee lakes are clear. All right, so I can get over top of fish on deep brush and I can vertical jig those fish. But for the most part, if you're out there roaming and you're looking for roaming fish and you're trying to snipe them with Livescope, you are not going to be able to utilize these rods for that technique. So those of you that see these YouTubers out, up north or out west, in Central America, got dirty water, they're able to use a 10 or a 12 foot rod and they're able to get right over top of those fish and hold it in their face and set that hook and get those fish real close to the boat because they've got muddy water. In clear water, like we have in East Tennessee, you're not going to be able to use these long rods on your Livescope, okay? So if you're fishing dirty water, you can get these long rods and you can utilize that technique for sure. Sneak up on those fish, get right in on them, drop the bait right down on their head, catch those fish. But in clear water situations, okay guys, if you're fishing clear water, you need to try those shorter rods, okay, where you can cast and pitch to those fish, okay? So that's the 10 footer. I use it for vertical jigging in deep brush, and I'll also use it at marinas. If I'm fishing marinas, okay, and let's say there's an open boat slip, but the fish are on the other side of that walkway, I can take a 10 or a 12 foot rod and I can ease up to that walkway on that marina and I can hold my rod over top of that walkway and I can catch those fish that are just on the other side, okay? So I will use a long rod for those purposes. And then also to troll, this is my middle rod in my trolling setup for long line trolling, for pulling crankbaits, for pulling planer boards. These ACC crappie sticks will do it all, okay? They'll pull boards, they'll long line troll, they'll pull crankbaits, however you want to do it. So that 10 footer is my middle rod in my trolling setup. All right, the beast, the 12 footer. Now ACC does have an 11 and they do have a 13. Okay, I do not have an 11 or a 13 because again, my trolling setup, 12, 10, 8s. Okay, 12, 10, 8 on either side. And then if I have two people in the boat, I'll drop down to a 6, but or 6.5. But 12, 10, 8, I like that separation in between my rods. I like that 2-foot separation. So again, that 12-footer, I will use this in deep brush from time to time, and I will use it to reach across the walkways at docks and marinas like I was telling you. But for the most part, I'm utilizing this rod as a trolling rod. Okay, this is my crankbait rod. This is one of the crankbait rods. This is one of the rods I pull planer boards with. It's one of the rods I long line troll with. So, you know, these rods are very versatile. You can use them in a lot of different ways. Again, you know, medium fast tips, okay? All medium fast. You can use these in a lot of different ways. Great rods, great tip, great backbone. I originally, before I went to ACC, I always wondered about the 2-piece dock shooting rods. No problem with them. I was always a 1-piece guy. And then I picked up an ACC that was a 2-piece, and I hadn't skipped a beat with it. So the 2-piece doesn't bother me at all. I really like it. Like I said, great backbone, great tip. Just the medium fast action is where it's at. Having that fast tip to be able to react to those fish, get that tip where it'll come right back, especially when you're dock shooting. When you're dock shooting, that fast tip is everything because that's where your speed comes from. Okay, so great rods. Again, I don't have the 11 or the 13-footer. Let's talk about the super grip for a minute. So ACC and a lot of their rods, they offer a super grip. Again, as I told you, I'm kind of a cork guy, but the super grip, that's your super grip right there, guys. It's like a wind grip. If you guys have ever played golf and know what a wind grip is, it's just a very, very soft, spongy type grip that, honestly, I'll be honest with you, I like it in my 10-footer because a lot of times I'm vertical jigging straight up and down with my 10-footer. And for those of you that know, if you've ever vertical jigged and set that hook on a big fish, when you rear back on this rod, it'll sometimes hurt your wrist, especially with a cork grip because there's no give in the grip. This grip allows you to have a little bit of give. So when you set the hook, that sponge almost takes some of the shock, or not almost does, it does, takes some of the shock out of your wrist. So it's very comfortable, very great grip. I do like it on my 10-footer for that purpose. When I'm setting that hook straight up and down, when I'm vertical jigging, it takes a lot of shock out of my wrist, okay? So I hope that helps. That is how I use each one of my rods from ACC. I hope that helps you guys with picking out a rod, understanding what each rod length is for, understanding what the fast tip does for you. The medium action is where it's at for crappie. You don't want to get too light of an action because then you get real whippy. You don't get good hook sets. You need a good backbone on that rod so that you can drive that hook through the top of that fish's mouth. That's where you're trying to get that fish pinned, is right in the top of the roof of the mouth. That's their hardest part of their mouth. As you know, crappie have a paper mouth. They're called paper mouths, but great rods, absolutely no doubt about it. I hope that helps you guys picking one out next time you hit their website. If you have any questions, leave me a comment. If you have any, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe before you leave. 10,000 subscriber giveaways coming up. We're going to give one angler a 2-day fishing trip with me here in East Tennessee, 2 different lakes, paid for by Wired. Your motel and your license are paid for by me. So smash that subscribe button before you leave. I appreciate it, guys. As always, God bless, and we'll see you later.